Virgil from Devil May Cry is iconic, and he's one of my favorite characters of all time. I'm a huge fan of anyone that uses a katana, but there's one thing another Master of the Blade has that Virgil doesn't. Butterflies. That's Narmaya, one of the many characters featured in Granblue Fantasy Relink, an action RPG with a huge emphasis on execution and a pretty high skill ceiling. There's also another game that features butterflies, Pokemon. So my natural thought after making that connection is, why don't we do a Pokemon Nuzlocke in Granblue Fantasy Relink? If you don't know what a Nuzlocke is, the basics are pretty simple. Each of your units gets a single life, meaning if they faint, they're considered gone forever. You're also limited in how many units you can recruit, and if you run out of Pokemon, it's game over. So we're just taking that concept and applying it here. We start off with a fair number of characters, but don't worry, that won't last. We're given a total of 3 recruitment cards throughout the game, which means our starting units plus 3 others are all the lives we get. Typically, if you go down in battle, you enter critical status and a bar begins draining. When that bar reaches the bottom, it's game over, but that won't really matter here, because if a character I'm playing goes down at any point, I have to restart checkpoint and that unit will be considered dead. You're also given a handful of free potions to use in every battle, and we're not going to be touching those. Your standard party consists of 4 characters, with 3 of them being AI controlled and fighting alongside you, but as an additional challenge, we'll be doing everything solo. Right at the start of the game, we only have access to the captain, who I have aptly named Wind Player. But the second we're able to switch off of him, we will. So while we get through the opening act tutorial, I want to thank this video's sponsor, myself. I don't have any sponsors, but I do have a channel membership that you can become a part of by clicking the join button next to my channel name. You get to have your name displayed at the end of each of my videos, a neat little badge next to your name when you comment or chat in live streams, special emotes to use, and some kind of behind the scenes challenge run clips of things I used to do before I started posting on YouTube. Your support means the world to me, and thank you so much for watching. Now let's get back to the run. After learning how to use skills and a big fancy cutscene attack, we arrive in town ready to go on our first adventure where the run can truly start. The character I decided to invest in to begin with is Catalina. She's a knight, which is reflected in her equally balanced offensive and defensive skills. She has a heal and a way to make herself invincible for a time, as well as a gap closer called Enchanted Lands. But that kinda sounds like a Magic the Gathering card, so instead we're gonna call it a much more comfy name, Stinger. Starting out is, by design, quite bare bones, which means options in battle are a bit limited. That's why Catalina having a heal was very important to me. I could recover from my mistakes a lot more easily than someone like Eugen, who's designed to be a pure damage machine. And with most of the battles in this chapter being quite short, I usually only ever needed the 1 heal. But you may have already noticed something off here. Wind Player is in the party. Didn't I say I'd be doing everything solo? Well, here's the thing. The captain is someone that can't actually be removed from the party. No matter who falls in battle, he'll always be there. He's something of a singularity in that way. So that's why we aren't playing as him, because if I died as him, he'd just still be in the party anyway. So in an effort to nerf him as much as possible, I removed all of his skills and made sure he had the weakest weapon equipped. He won't be receiving a single upgrade all game, so before long, he'll just be like a little bug hitting its face on a light bulb. After taking down a few goblins, it was time for the first boss, an even bigger goblin with a shield. He swaps between defensive and offensive states depending on his current health, and when he gets to around 30%, he also summons some big buff bodyguards. I thought it would be in my best interest to ignore them and focus on the boss, but that turned out to be my downfall. I had a series of abysmal dodges that resulted in me getting put into critical HP. My heal was on cooldown, so now the objective was just to survive. I stayed locked onto the boss since he had some long-ranged attacks that could easily snipe me if I wasn't cautious. But those bodyguards I was ignoring got the last laugh as one of them charged at me from off-screen and ended Catalina's run. Now that we have to switch characters, let's talk about what all goes into that. There are sigils that you can equip, which are easily transferable, but there are also some limited resources that can't be retrieved, namely mastery points or MSP. Each character has a skill tree where MSP is used that gives additional stats or allows the character to learn new skills or upgrade their existing ones. There are two main ways of gaining MSP throughout the story: opening treasure chests and leveling up. Since there are only a set number of enemies in each chapter, where and when my characters leveled up was pretty set in stone. In the same vein, there were only so many chests to open. I did my best to grab each one, but that still left me with an extremely limited pool of mastery points, which is shared between all characters. So every point of mastery I spent on Catalina is gone forever. With that in mind, I cautiously purchased some key nodes for EO, making sure to save enough MSP for another character if I needed them. I jumped back into the boss fight with my new character, and if you've seen this meme before, EO is quite literally both the hydrogen bomb and the coughing baby. In a world where Catalina's attacks were hitting for 60 to 100 damage a pop, EO could dish out 2200 damage in a single blow. Unfortunately, her survivability was pretty low. She had a heal, but it required standing within a glyph for several ticks of healing, and when things got hectic, I simply wasn't able to keep myself up. Good thing I saved that MSP because now I really need it. My next best choice was Rosetta because she too had a heal, but it was the worst one yet. Rosetta is much more of a support unit than a damage dealer because she can apply tons of buffs to herself, but when it came to actually chunking health bars, her vines felt like a light tickle. One of the buffs she can apply is regen, her only source of healing. Granted, I could keep 100% uptime on it, but the healing from it was so slow. By playing the long game and actually focusing on the ads when they spawned, I managed to finally overcome the Great Shield Mad Beat and make it to Chapter 3. Most of this chapter is a set piece that builds up to a boss fight against the primal beast of
wind is bullshit.
Furikin starts off in Sagittarius form with pretty slow attacks to get you introduced to the flow of the fight. The real battle doesn't start until 50% when it performs a magical girl transformation. This is when Furikin gets serious about sucking and blowing you around the arena, and the reach on her sword swings gets astronomically large. As I came to find out, the damage on said swings also becomes ridiculous because one of those swings essentially one-shot me, which meant that now I had to choose between playing Rackham or Eugen, two pure DPS characters with no healing whatsoever. I decided to go with Eugen, but I immediately ran into another problem. I didn't have enough MSP to get a very important skill. You might have noticed that when I dodged attacks as other characters, I gained a temporary invincibility buff. That's one of the very first mastery skills you can learn on each and every character, and it's practically essential for survival. But now we were going to have to face Furikin without even that. Enter Lyria. This girl in blue acts as a temporary guest party member for the first 3 chapters of the game, and she suddenly became the crux of my game plan. Getting hit was practically an inevitability with my lack of upgrades, and I needed some way to sustain myself. Lyria wanders around the battlefield, occasionally casting buffs on the party, but she will also sometimes create an aura of healing around herself. If I could get in there while she was casting it, I could actually heal. There's 2 problems with this though. Where she moves around the arena is random, so I had to keep an eye on her position, and she could be hit by the boss, which would knock her out of whatever she might have been casting, meaning I couldn't just camp out next to her waiting for heals because the boss would always be hitting her. Fortunately, with Lyria's help and Eugen's solid DPS, I was able to eke out the victory, but it was out of the frying pan and into the freezer. Immediately after the victory cutscenes, I was thrust into battle with a preset party against anime Nero, id. The game forced me to play as the captain, with Eugen, Io, and Catalina acting as the rest of my crew. And here's the most tragic part. This battle is a scripted loss. Id puts each and every one of the characters on the field into critical condition, which, for the purposes of this challenge run, means they're gone forever. Granted, I had already lost 2 of the 3, but Eugen the goat, who just cleared Furicane for me, unceremoniously bit the dust in a sequence I could do nothing about. The only solace is that Lyria getting kidnapped and Gran getting Dante'd also marks the start of Chapter 4, which means we get our first recruitment ticket, and I know exactly who I'm picking. This is Vayne, and he's kinda the best. He tanks, he heals, and he does a fine bit of damage all by himself. But don't be fooled, there's only a singular thought running through that head of his.
Ooh, hope I turned off the stove.
I chose to invest most of my resources into him going forward, but we still have Rackham in the backline to count on, so I also was upgrading him on the side. Chapter 4 was the perfect litmus test for my new character. It was my axe versus Galanza's spear. I couldn't surf on my axe, but still, I was cooler. Because with Vayne, I had a skill that gave me attack and defense up, plus a nifty thing called Guts. What that means is when I would take a lethal hit, I instead survive with 1 HP. And while the attack and defense buffs went away over time, Guts would stay active until it got procced. Basically, that meant if I played well enough, I could have another cast of the skill ready to re-up my Guts the second it gets popped for extra safety. Praise be to Bahamut for that buff, because I got a bit overzealous tanking Galanza's hits and actually did get knocked down to 1 health towards the end of the fight. Since Vayne can heal from his gap closing skill and off of his general heavy attacks, I made sure to bide my time and only strike when I knew my safety was guaranteed. In the end, Axe beat Lance. And by the way, who even names their kid Lance anyway? Like, it's literally a weapon, but nobody bats an eye. Yet when I tell them my kid's named Bastard Sword, all of a sudden I'm the one getting kicked out of Wendy's. Society's really icing me out here. Speaking of getting iced out, beating Galanza meant we made it to the frigid outskirts of Chapter 5. Most of this chapter focuses on everybody's favorite thing in a video game, an escort quest. Basically, there are 2 blocked doors along our path, and we need this ice magic lady to charge up enough mana in order to bust those doors down. Oh, and there are monsters constantly trying to stop her while she incants. If they hit her, the bar stops filling up. For reference, this first door is meant to take 1, maybe 2 minutes tops, but with just little ol' me keeping the hordes of undead and elementals at bay, it took 6 minutes. Matters only got worse in the next charging section because I had a whole boss to contend with on top of the horde regulars. I was worried that Bubble Lady taking too many hits would result in a game over, but after a while I realized that wasn't the case and took my time eliminating the boss before turning my focus to the small fry. Then, like the deadweight he is, Id shows up again, does nothing, and promptly leaves, marking the beginning of the real boss, Managarmer. This wolf has 2 equally deadly modes, Swift and Precise or Slow and Tanky. On top of that, below 50% health, he gets permanent Soul Mass for those Dark Souls fans out there. These little crystals hover around him, occasionally venturing out to shoot frozen pellets at me, and those attacks could freeze me, which had the potential to make some really dangerous situations. For the last 4% of the boss's health bar, I was having 1 continuous heart attack as misfortune after misfortune befell me. First, I lost my guts after getting frozen, then I had to narrowly dodge a couple of shots before I could reapply it. But that application didn't last long because I got stomped on while trying to take out one of the floating crystals. Immediately after losing the second guts, I needed to perfectly dodge a very ambiguous sweeping attack to survive. From there, I had to play the rest of the fight with no HP and no safety net. Thankfully, Managarmer did a long-winded attack that I could capitalize on, and I got the final blow. With that, we were soaring on to Chapter 6, and I was able to unlock Vayne's final trump card, Soul Eruption. This is basically Vayne's whole thing. He protects all of his allies, and when he's pushed to the brink, his determination only strengthens. Whenever my HP bar turns red, meaning I'm in the danger zone health-wise, I can use Soul Eruption to fully heal and gain a hefty 50% attack and defense buff. This was my super ultimate backup. Anyway, enough about Vayne, it's time to put the spotlight on Rackham. All this time, I'd still been investing in him, from upgrading his weapons to unlocking masteries, and all of it was for this right here. The Griffin is a flying boss that's part of the
wind is bullshit
archetype. He's also weak to fire, which is the element our helmsman just so happens to be. So let's go, buddy. It's your time to shine. Yeah, anyway, back to Vayne. Not much happened in this chapter. I fought Lalafell Sanctus, there was a pretty scripted boss fight. Oh, and I tried blocking a nuke. I'm so happy that it didn't take all my health because I did not have guts up. The second I entered Chapter 7's Molten Mountain, I had a vague reminiscence from my first playthrough of another scripted party wipe at the end of the chapter. So that meant we needed a sacrificial lamb. And we actually got our second crewmate card back in Chapter 6, but I didn't know who to use it on, so I just held on to it. Now, I had a clear idea of who I wanted. Someone with a decent heal, good range, and that I didn't care about at all. One person perfectly fit the criteria, so let's welcome Fairy to the team. I invested the bare minimum into her because anything more felt like a sunk cost, giving her upcoming demise. What this translated to was an insanely long Vulcan Bola fight. I almost didn't have enough damage to clear this trigger partway through the fight. I don't even know what happens when that bar fills up, and thankfully I didn't have to find out. Once I got a feel for the fight and found a relatively safe spot to stand, it was just a matter of keeping my footing and chipping away at this volcanic primal. Then Lilith showed her face. This was the scripted fight I recalled, and all I had to do was wait for her nuke to end the encounter. But memory is fickle, and it turns out that despite the attack saying it deals 99,999 damage, it actually just puts all your party members to 1 HP, which meant I could have just used Vayne and had a much easier time against Vulcan Bola. Oh well, at least we'll get another chance to sacrifice Fairy in Chapter 8. Everything was coming to a head, and with basically 2 more chapters to go before the end of the game, Sierra granted me my final pick of the litter, and I recruited Narmaya for the adventure. She can swap between 2 stances, one suited for single target decimation, and the other geared toward crowd cleaving. With her unrelenting power, I sliced through a pretty difficult boss and marched my way toward 2 more, Magliel and Galanza. The best way I could think to describe this duo boss fight is like chewing on a piece of candy you know is meant to be soft, but then all of a sudden you bite something hard. It's rough. I thought I had it pretty locked down, but then this happened. I got wombo comboed so hard I just straight up died. You know what that means? It's Vayne time, baby. Because of Vayne privilege, I had an invincibility bubble I threw down to circumvent the big attack that killed me as Narmaya. I did have to avoid it legitimately the second time around, and graciously there were no hiccups. Once Galanza was out of the picture, keeping Magliel pacified was easier than eating apples. But we weren't done with bosses just yet. It was time for the final showdown with Id. This time a legit fight. He actually wasn't hard at all. Because he showed up several times in the story already, I was quite familiar with his moveset, and even when he transformed mid-fight, he didn't gain that many tricks. After his defeat, I swapped over to Fairy for the last boss of the chapter, Angra. Now, the reason I picked Fairy for this is because she actually has a secret interaction with this boss where she deals 10 times more damage than any other character, and actually, we just needed her to get obliterated. From there, another scripted sequence started where we play as the captain once more, and then we get to smack a god around with Bahamut. All very safe scripted segments that basically tell us we've just punched our ticket to Chapter 9. This penultimate chapter featured a revisit of every nail-biting primal boss fight I've had up to this point, except now they have new mechanics and are even harder. Against Furikin, I saw my life flash before my eyes as I narrowly avoided death in a giant upsurge, and was rewarded with an extra character after the fight. Id felt like such a deadweight after his boss fight that he decided to make it up to us by joining forces. So I started using him, and he promptly died in the very next boss fight. Managarmer gave me much less trouble as Vayne this time around, but Gran, having received 0 upgrades this whole time, kept dying. My main concern was actually my critical gauge depleting and giving me a game over screen. I hadn't considered how I would rule the Nuzlocke if I technically died because of the critical gauge, but luckily I didn't have to make a decision on that since I managed to clutch out the fight before the captain truly bit the dust. Vulcan Bola went down way faster than the first time around, and then we just had to contend with Angra twice. The second fight got kind of sketchy because I stayed in the Shadowverse too long and lost my ticket out, meaning huge chunks of damage were ticking away at my health. But another portal generator spawned, and I got the hell out of there in the nick of time. And by taking down Angra, that was it. With Lilith's plans thwarted, we could all go home. Except her son was a closeted scaly and he didn't like that she took off his collar. So one last time, we had to go and stop Id's rampage as the god of rebirth and destruction from another dimension tried to take control of his body and soul. Also known as your average Tuesday. A fair amount of this final battle is pretty scripted, and the parts that aren't were easy enough to keep myself safe with all of Vayne's protective abilities. So for real this time, that was it, and the credits rolled on our Nuzlocke. Now, there is a post-game with a bit more story, but that mostly involves doing a bunch of extra boss quests and getting drip-fed story until you eventually play as Bahamut to kick Bahamut's ass. What I'm trying to say is, just like Cagliostro with exercise, I'm not doing that. While a majority of the run boiled down to using Vayne, this Nuzlocke was by no means easy. I locked in when I needed to on multiple occasions, and so many of the boss fights had me yelling at my screen both during and after them. Granblue Fantasy is a passion of mine, and I absolutely love this game. I hope through this challenge run I was able to show you guys a small piece of that as well. Thank you all so much for watching, have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Sayonara.